It really scares me that on a multiple choice exam, I could have equal understanding as the person sitting next to me. But simply because I'm not as good at taking multiple choice tests, I could score much lower. I want to avoid that at all costs. So I've compiled a list of the top strategies for acing multiple choice exams. Now there's a lot to talk about here, so I've split this video up into 3 main sections. First, we're going to look at the best optimized process for going through question by question in order to avoid making common errors or mistakes or misunderstanding the question. Then we're going to look at what to do when we have to guess on a question, some proven techniques for guessing on multiple choice tests. And lastly, we're going to look at which answer choice we should pick when we're down to 2 options and we're guessing, based on the psychology and statistics of which answer choices are more likely than other answer choices based on how test writers write exams. And spoiler alert, it's actually not C. So let's get to it. The first tip is, even before going into the class, we should get to know the teacher's testing style, or how they write the test. When a question says to check the best answers, plural, does the professor highlight and bold the fact that you're supposed to select multiple answers? If not, I'm going to be extra careful to make sure that I reread all the instructions. Also, does the professor like to include trick questions on their exams? Last semester, I knew that my biology professor was very upfront about the fact that there would not be any trick questions on the exams. So when I was going through each question, I didn't have to worry about second guessing myself and doubting whether or not the answer was correct or not. I could just stick with the option that I knew was correct and move on. All right, now we go into the test, and the first thing we do is calculate the amount of time that we have to answer each question. We count the number of questions on the exam, and we look at the clock to see how much time we have for the entire exam, and whether or not the professor is generous or whether they have a really hard cutoff time. And of course, we want to leave a buffer at the end to leave time for reviewing all the questions and for difficult questions that come up along the way. Now, far and away, the #1 cause of mistakes on multiple choice exams is misunderstanding the question. So here's the method that we'll use to try to avoid that. So we get to a new question, and the first thing we do is cover the answer choices and don't look at them. Then we read the question twice to get full understanding. Then we paraphrase the question in our own head. What is the question actually asking of us? Then in our own words, we formulate an answer to the question being asked, still without looking at the answer choices. And then only after we understand what we're looking for do we look at the answer choices and find the answer that best fits. Now, the reason why we do this is because test writers are very clever and they're trying to trick us. And so oftentimes they will write answer choices that are factually correct, but that don't answer the question being asked. And so by using this method, we're being focused on what the question's asking so that we don't get distracted by those superfluous answers. Another good strategy is to eliminate the incorrect answer choices first, and then see whichever one's left over and select that answer. I found out about this during SAT prep. Due to confirmation bias, once we select the answer choice that we think is correct, it's really hard to objectively look at all the answers and decide which ones are correct and incorrect. And so starting by knocking off the ones that are incorrect and seeing which ones are left over is the way that we combat that confirmation bias. All right, now we've gotten to the end of a page of questions. And a good strategy is to now check the questions that we've done on that page alone. Now, I don't always do this, but the advantage is that there's lower pressure when we go through page by page than if we do all the reviewing at the end when there's like 30 questions and we're like trying to hurry up and get it done before the time is up. The other advantage is that we don't have to spend as long catching our brains up on what the question was because it's fresher in memory. So consider doing this. All right, now suppose we've made it through all the questions on the test, but inevitably there are a couple that we don't remember the answer to. We could resort to simply guessing for those questions, but we can actually do a little bit better than that. One strategy is to envision the place in which we learned the material. Our brains have context-dependent memory, meaning that a lot of the time we'll have better retention of a concept if we're being tested in the same room as we originally learned the material in. Now, the good news is we can get a similar effect by simply closing our eyes and envisioning the place where we learned the concept, whether that was in a classroom or in the study hall or in our bedroom. Another cool technique can be found in Dr. Barbara Oakley's book, A Mind for Numbers, and it's called the Head Start Jump to Easy technique. Now, you've probably been told by a teacher that if you're stuck on a problem on a multiple choice test, that you should move on to a different question and then come back to the one that you're on at a different time. And this is actually really good advice. Now, not only is this technique good for pacing and time management purposes, but also because it activates the diffused mode thinking portion of our brain. So when we're working on a problem, we're using the focused mode of our brain. And then if we jump away and move to a different problem, our brain will be thinking about that problem in the diffused mode of our brain. And so when we return back to the question later on in the exam, our brain's been sort of churning on it in the background, and so we're able to have better results. All right, now we're at the end of the test, and the next tip is to specifically ask the professor to clarify questions that are grammatically ambiguous. Now, if a question could grammatically be legitimately interpreted in 2 different ways, I would recommend asking the professor. I do this all the time, and I've never had a professor who's been angry that I've tried to get clarification on what the question actually was. My recommendation is to wait until you're finished with the rest of the problems on the exam, and then go up with your paper and say, hey, this question says da 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 da. This could be interpreted two different ways. Did you mean this, or did you mean this? I'm pretty sure you meant this, but I wanted to make sure before I submitted my answer. And normally they'll say, yeah, that's exactly what I meant. I'll be like, okay, cool. Here you go. Here's my test. And I'll turn it in and walk out. All right, and the last tip for this section is to always, always, always double check all of your answers at the end of the test. On exam days, I'm almost always the last person to leave the classroom. And I know it's really, really easy to become jealous of the people who finish early and quit. Seems like they're the smartest ones in the class. But here's my rationale. I have spent hours and hours and hours studying to be prepared for this exam. Why would I throw all that away in order to save 30 minutes of time? If I think about it, spending 30 minutes of time in order to score 5 or 10 points higher is like insane return on investment that I could never get in any other thing that I would do in class. So that's sort of how I think about it. All right, now we're going to go through some proven tactics for guessing on multiple choice exams, rapid fire style. First, if you're positive that 2 answer choices are correct, always choose all of the above. Even if you're not sure about that last option, the answer has to be all of the above, so that's the one to pick. If 2 of the answer choices are opposites, one of those 2 answers is likely the correct answer. Look for grammatical giveaways. Oftentimes the question and the correct answer will have the same tense as well as nouns and verbs that agree with one another. And answer choices that seem to repeat a portion of the question tend to be incorrect. Correct answers tend to paraphrase the original question or just get right on and answer the question. So if it feels like the answer choice is like a filibuster, then treat it like one and kick it to the curb. Now the age-old question is, if we're unsure about a problem, should we stick with our original gut feeling answer or should we change our answer? And the research indicates that we should stick with our gut feeling and not change our answer. And the research also indicates that we should change our answer. Yeah, there's conflicting research on both sides. So here's a strategy to take advantage of the best of both worlds. After you fill in the answer to a question, write down a confidence indicator on how confident you are in your answer on a scale from 1 to 5. 1 being the least confident and 5 being the most confident. This will be helpful in weighing whether or not you should switch your answer later on. And it's helpful when you're flipping through your test to quickly find the ones that you're the least confident in that you want to check your answers for. Now here's the fun part. We can use statistics to exploit how test writers write their tests and which answer choices are most likely to be the correct answer choices from a statistical point of view. Now, William Poundstone did a bunch of research on this that he documented in his book, Rock Breaks Scissors. He gathered data from 100 tests and a total 2,500 test questions that he got from a variety of different sources, from grade school exams to university exams to written driving tests to even newspaper quizzes. And then he crunched the numbers and ran some statistics on which answer choices were most likely to be chosen as the correct answer. Here's what he found. On true-false questions, true was correct 56% of the time, whereas false was correct only 44% of the time. On multiple choice exams, where the options were A, B, and C, there was no distinguishable preference to any one of those options. But on multiple choice exams with the options A, B, C, and D, there was a very slight preference toward the choice B, which was correct about 28% of the time over the expected 25% of the time. And on multiple choice exams with A, B, C, D, and E option choices, E was the most likely answer choice to be correct, with B being actually the least likely correct answer choice. I think one of the most practical statistics that Poundstone discovered is that the answers all of the above and none of the above were correct about 52% of the time, which is pretty statistically significant. So if you're not sure between 2 answers, probably pick all of the above or none of the above. That's likely to be the correct answer. And lastly, a question has a higher than average likelihood of having a different answer than the question that came before it. This is most especially helpful on true-false quizzes where the answers are only true and false. I'll link below an article that I found that has some really helpful examples of how to use all these different sort of statistics guessing strategies on a particular problem in order to maximize the odds of getting a question right that otherwise you would just purely guess on. Now, of course, preparation is by far the best strategy for doing well on an exam. But I think that these strategies are most helpful, say, if we have a multiple choice question and then we've eliminated A and D, and now we're picking between B and C. Instead of leaving it to a complete 50-50 toss-up, we can increase our chances of getting the correct answer just slightly by using some statistical trends and our knowledge of like cognitive biases and how the test questions were written to maximize the chance that our guess is the correct guess by just a couple of percentage points, instead of just leaving it a complete 50-50 chance. And that is how we can put our best foot forward on multiple choice exams. If you found this video helpful, please smash a smile across your face. Until next time, I hope you have a wonderful day. Cheers.